Yes, perfect. So hello everybody. Welcome to this presentation. And first I want to say very good presentation so far. So I hope that I can keep the level of it. And with that said, let's begin. So first of all, the agenda for today, what I'm gonna talk about a little bit. First gonna be presentation, then how I ended up in LKB Kiruna, a little bit about LKB, some projects I'm currently working on, and what does the work require from me, and what I wish I could have learned. So pretty much a little bit about how work is and presentation about LKB if you don't know what it is, but I think pretty most of you maybe have heard about it or seen on the news. Further, let's go. So who's the person in front of you? But in this case, who's the person in front of your screen? It will be me, Maximilian Lörtge. I was born in Germany, lived some time there, also then moved to Chile, which is a mining country that really influenced my studies and my career path, since I got a lot of, you could say, of motivation to do this because of all the mines they had. And when I was little, I really liked to go into the mines of Chile. We moved to Sweden, and here I've been living most of the time in Stockholm mainly, and then I moved to Luleå, where I did my studies, where I did a master's in natural resource engineering, specialization in ore and mineralogy at Luleå University. That's a strong base for exploration geology, basically. So you have that in mind. I've also been working now for LKB basically for 2 years in the R&D department and for process and product development. I've been mostly working with water quality questions, processing, and mineralogy. One question I get often is how did I end up in LKB Kiruna? Well, there was a few reasons. First of all, at the time, I remembered that the main reason being COVID-19 that stopped my plans for a sabbatical year. This was in 2020, in the end of September. Hopefully, nothing like that will happen to you guys. But in that case, I felt like I needed some strong base of reassurance because the world was changing. So I tried to apply for a job. At the time, I did not want to move out from northern Sweden, so I wanted to stay in this area because I liked it, I had my friends here, and after the graduation, I felt like it was close from home at the time. And I also wanted to work in a well-known company worldwide within my field. And there were some choices, but it ended up being LKB in this case. And within LKB, there's a lot of different jobs, applications you can do. But in my case, I chose the R&D, and maybe sounds a bit arrogant to say choose because it's they who chose, but I really put a lot of extra energy and my will into try to get into the research and development, and mainly because I like to learn new things, I like challenging work, and I like to travel the world. This is the reasons why I chose this, and I really felt like it fitted me correctly. I think that's a quite important thing when you start applying for a job or trying to search for something that maybe fits your description as a person. So you have that in mind. A little bit about LKB, if you guys don't know. It's the biggest iron mine in the world in subterranean. Open pit is not nearly as big, but when we talk about subterranean mines, this is the biggest one. It's all the iron produced here in LKB, 80% goes to Europe, so it's important Europe supply. It's not 80% of all Europe, so keep that in mind. It's mostly LKB supply in Europe. It produces quite a lot of tonnage. It's quite old mine, which is something not very common in mining industry. Usually maybe the life length is 30, 40 years, something like that. This mine has been going on, the business at least 133 years it is now. And it's quite big in employment base for only having a few mines that we all work in. You can basically see that, there you go. You can basically see this is in the northern Sweden company, and it goes all the way from Narvik, that's in Norway, to Luleå, where Narvik is the Norwegian harbor and Luleå is the Swedish harbor. So you keep that in mind. And you have basically Kiruna that has one of the mines. Previously had two mines, Luossavaara and Kirunavaara. Therefore, we have the name LKB, Luossavaara Kirunavaara Aktiebolag, if you want some trivia. Next one is Svappavaara, where we have the mine here. And then we have Malmberget, where these are all the mines LKB have in Sweden. Previously, they had some external mines all over some places of the world, but then now in later year, they focus mostly in Swedish. I want to talk a little bit as well about the processing chain, because not only a mine is also to produce pellets, which is mostly the part I'm working in, that's in the more processing part of it, but still it's very important to keep in mind the mining aspects of this, which I will later on go in. But without further ado, if you don't know, first we do a screening of the material coming from the mine, and we will try to separate the big material from the small material in easy words. Then the larger material will get crushed down into more handle sizes that we go through in the processes chain, like the screening one. So we have the same type of material we can work with in the size distribution. After that, we do some purification by separating the waste material that goes forward, and then we keep the more clean material, which will be the magnetite at this point. That's why we can use some magnetic separation at this point. After that, we now enter into the enrichment part of the processing chain. And here we do some further accumulation, which means we grind it until we have the desirable particle size distribution, which is super important to create our desirable pellets that we do in the process. After that, we purify the ore even further by doing some further wet magnetic separation, where you separate the material and all the waste goes out. Then we get rid of the undesirable elements within, which will be this phosphorus that is included in the apatite. So this is basically apatite flotation, where, and I might include as well a reverse apatite flotation, where the waste is to get floated here and the material that we want to keep keeps in the bottom. After that, we do the pelletizing chain part, where we do filtration to get rid of all the water, which is a very important step to have the right amount of moisture to create the later stage would be the balling to create this raw pellet that we later on apply some heat to get the sintration. After getting the raw pellets, we apply some heating to dry it out even further. And in the last step, we actually reduce the pellet from magnetite to hematite, which creates a lot of heat. And this is a very, very good process for us because it's economical viable since we produce heat by applying the oxidation state. And then we oxidize magnetite to hematite, basically. And then we got some sintering and we get this end product, which will be the pellets. And this is basically what we produce from blast furnace pellets, the direct reduction pellet, and fines. And in the future, maybe you heard about the sponge iron, which has done a lot of news recently in the world, which it's very ambitious and a lot of money is in the game right now to see if we can make this possible. But we will see. We need a lot of people in this kind of transition. So this is mainly where the new generation of students such as you can be part of it to try to make this possible. And it can be everything from maybe exploration all the way to processing, where I'm mostly working in. Another recent news that was quite big, that is one of the biggest rare earth elements in Europe at the moment, after the report got official released. So a lot is happening right now in LKAB. Now, if I talk more about myself, the project I'm currently working on right now, just to give an idea what an explore geologist background is working on, it can be quite broad, especially when you're working in research. I'm not going to go through the list, but I'm going to focus on this one because this is what I'm going to present shortly about, so you have an idea how the work looks like. And don't worry, it's not going to be into details, just to give like the big picture of things. This is basically the Kiruna mine. And when we have the problem, oh, sorry, I did not say the name that I was working on, so I go back. It's the anetrite mapping in Kiruna. And here we're going to focus mostly on chemistry, geochemistry, processing, mineralogy, and data analysis. That's mainly the main theme in this step of the project. And what you need to know here that we have the Kiruna mine, and after we are exploring more deeper levels, we're going to create more of these infiltrations that gets in the deeper level of the mine. So you get the water infiltrating down all the way into the last, I would say, water collector, that we use later on in the process. But the thing that's important here, that this water will also dilute a lot of minerals that are in the way in the mine. And maybe our ore is not very reactant to the water, but there's some intrusions and some elements inside the surrounding bedrock here that can maybe dilute these elements and then create in the solution of the water and then keep going in the process. And to be more specific, it's going to be anhydrite calcium sulfate, which is a salt, isosoluble salt, that will create some problem later on in the process, which maybe you will not think that it will be a problem because it's quite inert, it's not acidic or basic. So you may ask, like, why is this a problem? Well, the problem is that since in Kiruna, this is a picture of the water resources in Kiruna right now, how the process looks above the ground. Here's the mine and it goes up, and here's the processing plant. This is what we see here. And what I want to emphasize with this picture, you don't need to look at the numbers, is that the water quality gets concentrated over time. This is a circular system, as you can see, that it goes around and goes around and goes around. So the element calcium sulfate, the gypsum, that's calcium sulfate or anhydrite, it will get enriched in this water. So we will have high concentrations of calcium and sulfate, which can give some problems later on. And the most reason why this happens is this is to help visualize that we have maybe, let's say, the mineral that you later that you increase the surface area by reducing the grain size, and then you create this iso-leachable material that happens a lot in the processing plant. And this will further increase the leaching potential of anhydrite that leads to increased calcium and sulfate. So the same picture as before, that I showed before, but now with the eyes on the anhydrite. And you can see that here we have the sources of the material coming from the ore. And the major leaching occurs here in the grinding steps. Then they will create some problems in the process further down, like in the flotation, it will be less effective because of the ions in the water. We cannot get rid of this unwanted material, and it will create some more problems along the line. So it's quite important to know the whole chain. That's what I'm trying to show here, that it doesn't only need to stop only at exploration or doing one certain part. This is the whole chain for the company, and something that we have with time now accept and try to learn more, that if we know this from before, we could have done a process to tackle it. But now, since the exploration or the geology was not very well understood at the time, or they did not took this into account, now it's a problem that we have tried to solve. So that's very important to have a broad understanding of the chain where you're working in. At least in LKAB's case is roughly what I want to emphasize now, something that I really did not have in the beginning. But what does the work actually require from me? Well, I usually say give what you have and learn what you miss, to be more humble about it, that you can give everything that you don't have. But some of the more concrete terms will be able to work together in teams, be the person that makes it easy to work with, that works already hard, and you don't need to be with a person that's negative. So this is one of the very, very important things that I appreciated when I work with a person. Communication is very important, especially from outside the company or inside the company, to able to listen and to communicate in a way that's easy and followable. Also, I like the presentations that are easy and followable. I don't know if you agree with me with my presentation, but I try to be like that. And then one point that I think is super important is the no bullshit. And what I mean with this one is, if you don't know something, then you have to say and be honest about it, because this is a team effort. No one knows anything, and we complement each other and really, really try to help and go forward with the project. You're not alone, and you're part of a team. That's what I try to mean. Another point that could be super important to understand is the time management ability. Maybe in studies it was not as important, but now it's really, really is, because you not only affected yourself, you affect somebody else with your time. But now with more of the technical part, I would say that you should try to learn a little bit of everything, because it's super important to have a broad understanding of everything. And then when you do a project, maybe you can really try to focus on what's important to learn. But if I have to say some things, I would say that analysis is super important. At least in my case, I cannot speak for every single job, but in my case, that statistical sampling law is super important. Analytical tool, such as RStudio or Excel, or having a software that could be really, really good to have. The academic knowledge that I use at least in my daily basis is more mineralogical, chemistry, and processing. Of course, when I did my studies, I never did everything of this, but you can always try to complement by reading more on your own. And then something that's super important as well, that maybe not very well discussed in academia, it depends who you ask, is the writing a report that's both technical, or that you also can write a report that's casual and yet informative, because sometimes the people you communicate in the company don't need to have the technical requirements. So you have to give the information in a way that's easily digestible. And one of the last points before I stop boring you out with my presentation is what I wish I could have learned. And I think one of the main points, it will be programming to automate simple yet demanding work. And this is more on the time management aspect. If you know programming, you have the possibility to really do your own kind of scripts that can help to simplify the work, because there's a lot of data management, at least in my work, that's really, really simple, yet you have to do it yourself. I try to learn now, but it takes more time. But I would recommend that you guys can do this as well. Then it could be much easier in the work in the future. And with that said, I want to thank you for your time and for listening. And if you have any question, you can just screenshot this and then maybe send me a mail about if you have any specific question you don't get to ask now. But I think that's everything from my part. So thank you very much.